My son took $300,000 from my savings, promising to repay me. Then he sold his house for $700,000, gave it all to his wife, and still demanded to live in my home. When I refused, she humiliated me with a slap before everyone. They thought I was weak. But in my study lay the papers that would destroy their lies. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in my living room, the same room I had sat in almost every evening since Mary passed away. The autumn light poured in through the curtains, soft and golden, brushing against the family photographs that lined the mantel. My chair faced the old stone fireplace, and above it was the wedding photo of Mary and me, taken nearly 40 years ago. She looked so radiant, so alive, and I could almost hear her laugh echoing in the room if I closed my eyes long enough. But tonight, all I could hear was the silence of a house that had been turned into a battlefield, a silence broken only by the memories pressing against my chest like weights too heavy to lift. I thought about everything I had done for Jeremy. Every sacrifice, every dollar pulled from my pocket, every late night working overtime so he could have a better start than I ever did. $60,000 for his college tuition, scraped together from savings and retirement accounts, while Mary and I cut back on vacations and dinners out. We told ourselves it was worth it, that watching him walk across that graduation stage was the reward for all the quiet sacrifices we made behind closed doors. Then came the car, $25,000 for that shiny sedan he just had to have so he could drive to interviews and impress future employers. I remember Mary patting my hand at the dealership, telling me, "He'll make us proud one day." I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But the biggest sacrifice was the day I handed him $280,000, nearly half of my retirement fund, so he could put a down payment on the house he said was his dream. He promised me he'd pay it back, said it was a loan, said I would never regret it. I looked around the living room now, at the worn rug Mary had chosen, at the wooden shelves where she had carefully displayed porcelain angels she collected, each one a gift from birthdays past. And I realized something that cut deeper than any slap or insult ever could. My son had betrayed not just me, but everything this house represented. This house, valued now at $650,000, was not just bricks and timber. It was a monument to 40 years of marriage, the place where Mary and I built our life, raised our son, and shared the simplest, most precious moments. To think that Jeremy and his wife could look at it as just another asset to claim made my stomach turn. They weren't just trying to take a house. They were trying to erase my life's work, the memories, the meaning. And that betrayal, the coldness of it, threatened to hollow me out from the inside. I remembered the phone call like it had happened minutes ago. I was eating dinner, my fork halfway to my mouth, when the phone rang. Jeremy's voice came through, buzzing with excitement, telling me he had sold his house for $720,000. He said it as if he had just won the lottery. My fork clattered against the plate as he bragged about how Lori, his wife, was already dreaming about designer furniture, a Mercedes she had her eye on, and a vacation package at some luxury spa. My throat tightened as I tried to form words, but the only thing that came out was a strangled whisper. "Jeremy, what about the $280,000 I gave you?" There was silence. Long, cold silence. Then he laughed. "Dad, you gave us that money. It wasn't a loan. You don't need it anyway. You've got this big house, your pension, and Mom's insurance. We're family. Family helps each other." His words cut sharper than any knife. My chest ached, not from age, but from betrayal. I remembered sitting at the bank years ago, signing that withdrawal slip from my retirement account, telling myself it was for Jeremy's future, for his stability. Now that moment felt like a cruel joke. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I could almost hear Mary's voice, soft but firm, warning me. "Don't give him too much, Robert. He's reckless. He takes advantage. You need to protect yourself." And I, blinded by hope, by love, by the desperate belief that a son would never turn against his father, had ignored her. Now the truth hit me with a force that stole my breath. Mary was right. She had been right all along. Jeremy hadn't just made a mistake. He had made a choice. He had chosen greed over gratitude, entitlement over respect. The grief I felt turned slowly, painfully, into anger. And from that anger came something I hadn't felt in years: resolve. I whispered into the empty room, my voice trembling, "Mary, you were right. I should have listened. But it's not too late. I'll fix this. I promise you, I won't let them take what we built." The room seemed to answer me with its silence, the photographs on the mantel watching like silent witnesses, urging me forward. My heart no longer beat with only hurt. It beat with purpose. I stood up, legs unsteady, but determination carrying me forward. I walked into my study, the room where I had kept every important document of our lives. The oak desk still bore scratches from years of use, and on its surface was the lamp Mary had insisted we buy, even though I had said it was too expensive. I pulled open the stubborn drawer, the one that always stuck halfway, and forced it wide until it gave with a groan. Inside lay a manila folder, labeled in my neat handwriting, "Jeremy House Loan, 2021. My hands shook as I lifted it. The weight of it, heavier than paper, had any right to be. I laid the folder on the desk, turned on the lamp, and watched the yellow light spill across the pages. There it was, the contract, 8 pages long, signed by Jeremy himself, notarized, witnessed. The words leapt off the page like lifelines. Principal amount, $280,000. Term, 5 years. Default clause, full amount due if payments are missed. And Jeremy hadn't paid a single dollar. Not one. My fingers traced his signature at the bottom of the page, the same hurried scrawl I had seen on birthday cards when he was a boy. But this wasn't a card. This was a legally binding promise, and it was my weapon. The anger inside me began to cool, replaced by a calm, cold clarity. They thought I was powerless. They thought age had softened me, made me weak, made me incapable of fighting back. But they were wrong. Dead wrong. Because I had this contract. And contracts don't care about family excuses. Contracts don't care about manipulation or crocodile tears. Contracts are black and white, and Jeremy had signed his name in black ink. I lifted the contract into my hands and whispered, "They think I'm old, Mary. They think I'm tired, that I won't stand up for myself, but they're about to see how wrong they are." My voice grew stronger as I spoke. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a vow. I sat back down, the contract still glowing under the lamp, and I realized that this was no longer just about money. This was about respect, about dignity, about drawing a line and saying no more. Jeremy had taken my generosity and twisted it into weakness. Lori had raised her hand against me, shaming me in front of neighbors who had known me for decades. But I still had something they could never take away: the truth, documented, signed, and sealed. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second a reminder that time moves forward, that moments pass, but also that decisions must be made. I could feel the weight of the house around me, its walls lined with decades of laughter, tears, and memories. This house wasn't just a building worth $650,000. It was Mary's kitchen, where she taught Jeremy how to make pancakes on Saturday mornings. It was the backyard where we set up a slip and slide for his 9th birthday. It was the hallway where she hugged me after her last chemotherapy session, whispering that she was proud of me no matter what happened. And now, my own son wanted to strip it down to a number, a possession, something to be claimed and consumed. No, I wouldn't let that happen. I pressed the folder against my chest and closed my eyes. "Mary," I whispered again, "they think they've beaten me. They think they've won, but this is just the beginning. They're about to see the fight they never expected." And with that, Chapter 2 closed not in despair, but in awakening. The pain was still there, raw and jagged, but beneath it ran a current of steel. Tomorrow would bring action. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. And tomorrow, Jeremy and Lori would learn that a father's patience has limits, but his fight lasts until the end. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. Morning arrived with a gray light that slid across my kitchen table and touched the mug Mary used to favor, the one with the small chip on the rim. I brewed coffee and stood without drinking, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the clock over the stove. I had slept with the contract in my head, every clause like a rung on a ladder I could climb if the ground gave way. 8 pages, notarized, witnessed, dated. $280,000, 5 years, interest at 8%. I repeated those facts the way some men say a morning prayer. I needed the words inside me before the day tried to take them away. Headlights rolled across the blinds and stuttered to a stop. A diesel engine coughed. Then came the knock. Not a polite knock, a pounding that rattled the chain on the door and made the porch boards answer back. I set the mug down and walked the hallway I had walked 1,000 times, past photographs of our family vacations, past the wedding picture above the mantel where Mary smiled as if the world were simple and the future would always behave. Through the frosted glass I could make out shapes, the slant of a shoulder, the shine of a suitcase handle, the hard block of a moving truck squatting in my driveway. I opened the door as far as the chain allowed. October air pushed in, cool and damp with the smell of leaves. Jeremy filled the frame, taller than me now, hair a little thinner at the temples, the same boyish grin that used to get him out of Saturday chores. Lori stood behind him in a quilted jacket with a glossy sheen, a phone in her hand like a small mirror. 2 movers leaned against the truck, arms crossed, watching the way men watch when they know a story is about to begin. Jeremy announced that they were moving in for a while, just until they found something suitable. He called it a temporary arrangement. He said it quickly, the way a man plucks a bandage from skin, certain the sting will pass if he rushes. I kept the chain in place and told him no. I told him this house was not a stopover or a landing pad. This house was the life Mary and I built, board by board, check by check. He smiled wider, as if my refusal were a joke a father tells so his son can perform the punchline. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The boards gave their tired creak under my slippers. Across the street, Harold pretended to adjust his sprinkler timer. Mrs. Chen paused on her steps with her terrier, the leash taut. Tom Patterson jogged past and slowed, one earbud out. We had an audience, and I felt the heat that rises when a private boundary turns public. Lori tilted her chin, slipped 2 fingers into the pocket of her jacket, and held up a key. Silver, smooth, familiar. Light caught on the teeth and threw a small star across the porch post. She said Mary had given Jeremy a spare years ago. She said emergencies happen, and this was an emergency. She turned her wrist so the street could see the key, and one of the movers chuckled, a sound that floated out into the cool morning and landed like grit behind my eyes. The key was real. I remembered Mary at the kitchen table, sliding an envelope across to Jeremy and telling him it was only for a true emergency, only for those nights when a lock betrayed him and there was no better option. Only. A small word that carries a lot of weight when it is respected and none at all when it is not. I tasted metal on my tongue. I told Lori a spare key was not a deed. Kindness was not a transfer of title. She smiled in a way that made my jaw ache and said that people on this street would rather see a young couple fill a big house than an old man rattling alone inside it. She used the word confused. She said it twice, planting it like a flag for the neighbors to notice. Jeremy lifted his hands like a referee and told me not to be selfish. He said the house was worth $650,000 and most of the rooms were empty anyway. He reminded me we were family, that families help, that I had always taught him that. He said they had just sold their place for $720,000, a number he loved to repeat, and that they needed somewhere to breathe while they planned their next move. He mentioned my pension. He mentioned Mary's insurance as if it were a rain barrel I could dip into forever. I thought of all the barrels already emptied, $60,000 for tuition so he could graduate without the anchor of debt. $25,000 for the car, he said, would carry him into a better life. $280,000 for the down payment on the house he called a dream. I saw the numbers as clear as if Mary had written them in chalk on the driveway. I told Jeremy that generosity had already come to his door in full measure. I told him it came with pages and signatures. I told him the answer was still no. He looked baffled. He said money given in love was a gift, not a loan. He said he remembered hugging me after the closing and that people do not hug after signing a debt. The logic sounded pretty and lazy, like a well-practiced tune played on a broken piano. I kept my hands at my sides and my feet on the boards and said we were done having this talk on my porch. Lori lifted the key and wagged it, a little bell begging the past to excuse the present. She told the movers to start unloading. I raised my voice only enough to reach the crew. I told them the items in that truck had no business crossing my threshold. I told them they were not to set a single box on my steps. Something in my tone touched whatever part of a working man respects a line. They waited. Lori's smile thinned. Jeremy puffed his cheeks and let the air out slowly, like he used to do before arguing a grade with a teacher. The neighborhood leaned closer. Harold abandoned the timer and crossed his arms. Mrs. Chen adjusted her scarf and lifted her chin. Even the mail carrier paused at the end of the block. I said this was the end of the conversation in public. I said there would be no shouting matches on my steps. I said they needed to leave. Jeremy muttered that I would regret treating my own blood this way when I was old and needed help. He said old in a tone that tried to make the word small. I looked at him and felt something in me click into place that I had been missing for years. I turned, opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it. The chain slid home with a sound that satisfied me more than any applause. The pounding came again. The wood held. I walked back to my study and sat at the desk where Mary used to pay bills and write Christmas cards. The lamp made a small yellow pool on the blotter. I opened the drawer and laid the contract flat, where the light could shine on it. Principal, $280,000. Interest, 8%. Payments are due monthly beginning in January after the closing. Acceleration after 90 days missed. My son's signature looked rushed but certain. The notary seal sat like a gold coin pressed into wax. I read the lines aloud, quiet but clear, so that if the walls needed to testify one day, they would remember my voice. The phone was heavy in my hand, the old landline with its scuffed buttons and long curling cord. I dialed the number I have dialed for years. Samuel Grant answered on the second ring, crisp as a starched shirt. I told him the morning's facts in one sweep. The truck, the key, the neighbors, the refusal. The contract is in front of me. Samuel listened without interrupting, then told me what mattered. The agreement was enforceable. The sale of Jeremy's house without addressing the loan did not erase obligations. He would draft a demand letter today, send it certified, and begin the paper trail that stands up even when tempers do not. He would also prepare a notice revoking any implied permission associated with the spare key. If they tried to use it, we would be ready. He asked me if I was all right. I told him I was more than all right. I told him I finally felt steady. I hung up and looked through the study window. Lori paced the sidewalk with her phone to her ear, stabbing the air with one finger as if punctuation could peel the paint off my door. Jeremy leaned on the railing and stared at the knob like a boy stumped by a puzzle. I dialed my son to keep the conversation off the porch and on a line I could describe later with dates and times. He answered on the second ring, voice tight. I told him I was demanding repayment in full, principal and interest, under the agreement he signed. I said the amount out loud. He laughed, a short, brittle sound, and said I was confusing generosity with business. I kept my voice calm. I named the clause, the page, the date of the signature, and the name of the notary. I told him I had a copy in front of me and another in the safe. He told me I would not do this to my own child. He told me no decent father would. He told me to think about Christmas next year. I told him I was thinking about promises and about the kind of example a father sets when he keeps them. He accused me of blackmail. I told him it was enforcement. He threatened to fight. I told him we would meet in court if that was his choice. Silence stretched, thin as wire. I could hear him breathing. I could hear my own breath answer, slow and steady. He said I would regret it. He said I was old. He said the neighborhood was watching. He wanted shame to do the work that contracts had already done. I told him I was done with shame. I told him to expect a letter. When I hung up, the house felt different. It felt awake, as if the studs and beams had been waiting years for me to remember how to stand inside my own life. I wrote notes on a yellow legal pad while the details were still warm. Time of the knock, names of neighbors, description of the truck, the way the key flashed, the words they used, confused, selfish, old. The engine of the truck finally coughed to life. The movers climbed in. The street exhaled. I opened the door again and looked at the scuff mark where a box had been set down and lifted back up. I took a picture with my phone. Evidence looks small until the day you need it. Harold crossed over with his mug and asked if I needed anything. We sat on the steps for a minute in the pale sun. He said what I already knew. He had seen enough. He would speak if necessary. After he went home, I gathered documents the way a man gathers firewood before a storm. Tax returns that showed the withdrawal of $280,000. Bank statements with dates that lined up like fence posts. The thank you card Jeremy wrote in a rush 3 summers ago, the one where he promised again to repay me. I put them in a fresh folder and labeled it with today's date. I made copies, then copies of the copies. I stacked them neatly and felt my pulse slow. I called the bank and asked to speak with the branch manager. I explained that there had been a family dispute and that I wanted a note placed on my file requiring a cooling period before any large withdrawals. The manager knew my voice. Mary and I had been customers there since we bought this house. She said she understood and would flag my accounts. She asked if I felt safe. I told her I felt prepared. Prepared felt better than safe. Jeremy texted around noon. He said we should talk like decent people. He said I was making them look bad. He said he would consider a compromise if I stopped being stubborn. Stubborn. The word tasted familiar and strong. Stubbornness kept Mary alive longer than doctors predicted. Stubborn kept this roof over our heads during layoffs in '98. Stubborn built this fence. I replied that we would talk when counsel was present. Lori left a voicemail. She said I had humiliated them. She said she did not mean to wave the key like that, but I had pushed her. She said the neighborhood would take their side because the youth deserve a chance. She used the word confused again, and my hand tightened around the phone as if the plastic could protest with me. I saved the message and wrote a note about it in my folder. By mid-afternoon, the air smelled like rain that could not make up its mind. I walked the perimeter of the house. I checked the window latches and the side gate. I made sure the spare key Mary once insisted on tucking under the planter was long gone. I stood under the maple and watched a gold leaf let go and circle down. I told the tree, and the memory of Mary in its shade, that I was done apologizing for drawing a line. Before bed, I walked the hall again. I paused at the mantel and touched the frame of our wedding photo, just a fingertip to the edge so I would not smudge the glass. I told Mary I had started. I told her I would finish. I told her I knew where the line was now, and I would not step back from it. The house answered with quiet I could trust. I slept without dreams. Samuel's receptionist knew my name. She led me to a conference room where the table was long and the chairs tried too hard. Samuel came in with a folder under his arm and a pen already uncapped. He read through the demand letter he had drafted, line by line. The amounts, the dates, the clause numbers. He had included language revoking permission to enter the property for any reason without my explicit consent. He had included instructions for future communication. He asked if I had questions. I asked him to add one more line. Not for the court. For me. A sentence that said, "Boundaries protect everyone who honors them." He smiled and said the judge would not care, but he would add it anyway, because it might help me remember what this was really about when the noise got loud. I signed the letter. My hand did not shake. On the way home, clouds stacked like folded blankets in the west. I stopped at the bank, spoke to the manager again, and thanked her for flagging my accounts. I asked for a printed note confirming the new requirement that any large withdrawal would trigger a hold. She printed it, slid it across the desk, and squeezed my hand. "People can disappoint you," she said softly, "but paper keeps its word." I tucked the note into my folder like a small shield. Late afternoon, Jeremy called again. I let it ring 3 times before answering. He went straight to the accusation. He said I was airing private business in public by involving a lawyer. He said neighbors were gossiping. He said my pride would cost us our family. I let him finish. Then I said the family line had been crossed the day promises were turned into leverage. I said I was willing to meet with counsel present. He hung up without another word. The click in my ear did not feel like a loss. It felt like the end of a bad story that had been told too many times. I wrote the time of the call in my notes and underlined the word enforcement twice. Outside, the maple let go of another handful of leaves, and the yard accepted them without complaint. I breathed in, breathed out, and felt something I had not felt since Mary's last good day. Control. Not over other people. Over myself. Twilight laid a purple edge on the sky. I warmed soup on the stove and ate with the back door cracked so I could hear the crickets start up along the fence. I put the bowl in the sink, turned off the kitchen light, and stood in the doorway to the study one more time. The lamp on the desk lit the contract like a small stage. I picked up the folder, closed it gently, and slid it back into the drawer. Then I turned the key and felt the tumbler catch. Tomorrow would bring paper and process. Tomorrow would bring new words I had not said out loud in years. Demand, default, acceleration. But tonight belonged to a quieter word. Beginning. I went to the living room window, looked out at the street, and let the calm of a neighborhood returning to itself wash the day's dust from me. I whispered to Mary that I was ready. I whispered that they thought I was weak, but the game had only just begun. I closed my eyes, breathed once, and felt courage settle quietly beside me there. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. The slap landed like a crack of lightning across a clear winter sky, and for a breath, the whole street went silent. I tasted copper and watched my porch tilt, then steady. The sound kept moving down the block, bouncing off mailboxes and siding. Lori kept her hand in the air as if a raised palm could hold time. Across the street, Harold dropped his coffee. Mrs. Chen's terrier barked once and hid. I put my fingers to my cheek and felt heat gathering there. I had told them no. I had told them this house, my $650,000 house, the years of sweat and Saturdays, was not their refuge just because they had burned through $720,000 like kindling. The door stayed shut. When it did, Lori chose a public scene. It was loud and mean, meant to make me fold. Instead, it gave me the last piece I needed. Jeremy's voice arrived behind the slap, sharp and high, trying to seize the story. He shouted that I owed them this house. He shouted the number as if a price tag could strip a deed. He said blood has rights, that a big house was wasted on a widower. It was all volume, no law, and it struck me how hard he worked to sound sure. Then Lori took the stage she had made. She said I was not well. She said everyone could see it. She said the police would believe a young couple trying to help an elderly father who had become confused. Confused. She rolled it like a sweet. To me, it tasted like rust. I looked at Harold and saw the slow shake of his head. Mrs. Chen's chin lifted a degree. Tom edged closer, ready for the truth. I did not shout back. I did not fling words like gravel. I stood with my hand on my cheek and said they needed to leave my porch. Quiet carries when the other side is noisy. Jeremy kept talking about family and Mary. He tossed her name like a rope. I thought of her steady eyes and how she hated a bully who used love as a mask. I kept my voice level. They did not move. I stepped back into the house and shut the door. The latch clicked, then the deadbolt. I stood at the peephole and watched their faces flatten in the round glass like coins. I watched Lori glance at the key in her palm and hesitate. I watched Jeremy rub his jaw as if thinking. Then I turned away and walked to the study. The contract waited under the lamp like a patient friend. I lifted it, felt the paper's grain, put it back down, and called Samuel. He answered on the second ring, and I told him the morning in a string without decoration. The slap, the crowd, the accusations about my mind. He asked for witnesses. I gave names. His voice shifted from warm to steel. The demand letter would go out today, with a notice revoking any permission to enter and a warning about trespass. Copies would go to Jeremy, to Lori, and to the police liaison. I iced my cheek. I wrote down everything. The hour, the minute, the words, the people, the weather, the sound of the truck idling, the smell of wet leaves. I wrote the word confused and underlined it twice. Then I sat very still and listened to my own breath until the shaking left it. By late afternoon, the certified letter was on its way. Samuel texted a scan. The figure did not blink. $372,000, principal and interest, immediately due under acceleration. He wrote the numbers in words and digits. He included the key clause and a warning about attempted entry. He asked me to rest. I said I would try. At dusk, the phone rang again. Jeremy. Anger, but with a tremor under it. He warned me I would regret the letter, saying only a monster sues his own blood. I let him empty his words. Then I told him a promise written and notarized outlives hurt feelings. I said further conversation would be through counsel. He cursed. Lori grabbed the phone and spat out threats about the police and neighbors. I told her the call was noted. I hung up, and the house felt solid beneath my feet. The next morning, the street was clean, as if the night had come through with a broom and brushed yesterday into the gutters. I raked the maple leaves into a low, careful pile and carried them to the bin. When I straightened, Harold was at the curb with his mug. He asked if I was all right. I told him I was steady. He told me he had written down what he saw, the time, the words, the way Lori lifted the key. He said he had dated and signed the page and that he was ready to sign again if a judge needed his voice. I thanked him and felt the fence posts of my life dig back into the ground. By noon, Jeremy had the letter in his hand. He called from the post office lot, breath short. He called the amount insane and the interest theft. I reminded him that 8% was on page 3 and acceleration was spelled out in black and white. He vowed to hire a lawyer and make me look foolish in court. I said, "Good, bring counsel, bring daylight, bring the truth." The line went quiet, and he ended the call without saying goodbye. That evening, Samuel called to say he had received an email from a firm downtown, a reply written at 4:58 p.m., brisk and bleached of warmth. They represented Jeremy and Lori now, at least for this flurry of trouble. They wanted to discuss a payment plan. Samuel asked me how firm I wanted to be. I told him as firmly as oak. He said he would set a meeting for the next morning and that I should bring the original contract, the bank statements, and any notes from witnesses. He told me to sleep. The conference room was paneled in wood so dark it looked wet. A row of framed degrees lined the far wall like tidy windows. Samuel sat at my right, spectacles low on his nose, pen uncapped. Across from us sat a man barely older than Jeremy, hair perfect, tie too tight, eyes moving quickly and landing on nothing. He said his name, and then he said this was a matter better settled by family. He smiled the way men smile when they have rehearsed for a mirror. Samuel did not smile. He slid the contract forward until the blue ink of the signatures sat in the circle of light. Before anyone spoke further, Samuel opened a slim red folder and fanned out documents like a dealer who knows the table. There were copies of the bank withdrawals, my retirement account statement, and 3 sworn statements our neighbors had dropped at my door. Harold had typed his on an old machine that left a faint ridge on the paper. Mrs. Chen's was neat as a recipe card. Tom's included a time-stamped photo of the moving truck. Samuel arranged them in a neat grid and asked the young lawyer to look carefully. A room can tilt without moving when facts are finally given a place to sit. The young lawyer skimmed, then slowed. He asked if Jeremy had paid anything in 3 years. Samuel said not a dollar. He asked if the loan funded the down payment on the very house they sold for $720,000. Samuel said yes. He asked about delivery. Samuel set the green slip on the table. He asked about witnesses. Samuel named neighbors. A pause followed, the kind that changes a case without anyone using the word. He returned with a smaller offer, $50,000 now, and $2,000 a month. Samuel declined without looking over. He said, "Full payment, or we proceed." He added that slapping a man on his porch does not strengthen a negotiation. The lawyer flushed, called it a family misunderstanding. Samuel tapped the contract. He said families sign too, and signatures matter. Jeremy was in the hallway. I saw him through the glass, pacing, rubbing his temples, talking to Lori with the phone pressed flat against his ear. She was speaking too. You could tell by the way his shoulders twitched, as if catching hail. He caught sight of me and froze. For a second his face emptied, and I saw the boy who used to stand in the kitchen doorway after breaking a window, trying to decide whether truth or charm would save him. He looked at the contract on the table and then at the witnesses' pages lying like quiet stones. Something in him wavered. Through the glass, while Jeremy stalled in the hallway, I counted my breaths the way Mary taught me before her last surgery. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. Calm is not surrender, it is preparation. I kept my eyes on the signature at the bottom of the contract and remembered the feel of Jeremy's hug the day he signed, quick and light, already half turned toward the door. I decided I would not chase him anymore. I would only meet him where the truth lives. When the door opened, he came in with his hands half raised, palms out, the universal sign for, "Don't be mad, let me explain." He said it was never supposed to get here. He said he would make it right. He said it all so fast the syllables tripped over each other and fell to the carpet. Lori's voice burst through the speakerphone before he could finish. She said I had set him up. She said I had shoved him into debt and then pulled away the stairs. She said any decent father would forgive and start over. I looked at the contract and kept my mouth still. For a moment, the room went so quiet that the air felt thick. Then Lori started again, higher, sharper. She threatened to tell the police that I was unstable. She threatened to tell the newspapers. She threatened to tell the neighborhood association. Samuel reached across, pressed the speaker button, and in a voice as smooth as the table, he informed her that the call was now being recorded and that threats would be noted as part of the file. The line went dead and left a clean silence behind it. Jeremy sagged into the chair and covered his face. When he looked up, the bravado had drained away. He whispered that the sale money was gone, listed purchases that sounded like smoke. He asked for time. Samuel said 30 days. He wrote the date on a sticky note and slid it across. Jeremy nodded, slowly, as if gravity had doubled. The days that followed were a slow, deliberate march. Samuel filed the papers he had warned he would file. The court stamped them with a date and a number that made the whole thing official in a way even grief cannot argue with. I mailed copies to myself and did not open the envelopes, a small trick I had learned from a neighbor who worked in insurance, a way to time-stamp a thing in your own possession. I slept and woke and raked and read and waited. When the court clerk stamped our filing, the sound was small and final, like a door closing softly in a quiet house. The scheduling order set a status date in a courtroom paneled in old oak. I sat on a bench for a moment after we left the counter and looked through the doorway at the empty jury box, the flags, the seal. A courtroom is just a room until you imagine the weight it holds. I felt ready to sit upright and speak plainly if called. Calls came, and I let most of them go to voicemail. When I listened, I wrote. Jeremy said he had planned to make it right all along. Then, hours later, he said I had forced his hand. Lori said the neighbors were laughing at them and that I would live to see how cruel laughter can be. I saved each file. I titled them with the date and the time and the number of seconds. Recordings are not any heavier than other files, but they feel heavier when you know what they hold. On the 12th day, a message from the young lawyer arrived, voice thin with forced calm. He asked if we might consider accepting a pledge against future wages and the sale of the Mercedes to satisfy part of the debt. Samuel responded in writing that partial was not on the menu. Payment in full, or we proceed. The answer was a door closing quietly and firmly in a drafty house. The wind could look for another crack. On the 20th day, Jeremy appeared at my gate without calling. He did not try the latch. He stood on the sidewalk and kept his voice low. He said the car was listed, the furniture consigned, and the jewelry in return. He said he would put it all in writing to Samuel. I told him to do that and to include a timeline. He nodded, looked at the porch, and left without another word. On the 29th day, a cashier's check sat in a legal envelope on Samuel's desk, next to a typed apology with careful margins and a shorter letter that said, plain as a fence post, "We accept responsibility." Samuel slid the check toward me so the light picked up the numbers. $422,000, including damages and fees. The amount looked like a mountain and a door. I did not touch the check. Not yet. I asked Samuel to read the apology again. When he finished, he set his glasses on the table. He told me I did not have to forgive, and I did not have to forget. I had to decide what to do with my peace now that I had earned it. He tapped the contract with his pen and said the line that will matter when I am truly old. Paper keeps its word. I walked out into a wind that smelled like rain and stone. I held the envelope under my coat and moved through the lot slowly. In the car, I let the engine idle and replayed the porch, the shout about rights, the look in Lori's eyes when the glass wall told her the show was over. I thought of Mary's steady hand on my shoulder and let the day settle into place. On the way home, I stopped at the bank. The manager welcomed me into her small office with a photo of 2 kids on a fishing pier. She verified the check with the patient's steps. When she finished, she said justice often works, but only when people insist. I thanked her, signed the deposit slip, and walked out lighter than I had walked in. I drove past the house Jeremy had sold. The yard was already different. New owners had trimmed the hedges too tightly. The porch light was a colder color. I felt nothing for the bricks. I felt something for the boy who had once wanted to do right and got lost somewhere between wanting and doing. I did not swallow the feeling. I did not feed it either. I let it be. At home, I placed the deposit receipt in the folder beside the contract and the demand letter and the witness statements. I closed the drawer. The house was quiet in that very specific way an old house can be when it is pleased. I brewed tea and stood at the back door, watching a thin line of cloud break itself on the edge of the hills. I needed to say a thing out loud, and the empty kitchen was a good place to say it. They thought I was weak. Now they see the consequences. Night pressed its fingers against the windows, and I pressed mine against the cool porcelain of Mary's mug. I sat at the table and let the steam touch my face. My cheek no longer ached, my jaw no longer jumped. A space opened inside me where fear had been parking, and into that space came a simple plan. I would keep the house. I would keep my boundaries. I would keep my peace like a candle in a winter window. There was one more thing to do before the day was over. I walked the hall and stopped at the mantel. I told Mary the numbers. I told her about the meeting room and the way Samuel kept stacking facts until there was no air left for lies. I told her about Jeremy's face when the math was louder than his voice. I told her I would not let bitterness take the good out of what remained. I told her I would sleep. And then I did. Feeling dismissed, labeled, confused, pushed out of your own home. That pain is heavy, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves to be seen and to have justice, comment the keyword, justice. Now watch what they choose to do to change that. If you've ever been talked over, ignored, or told you don't matter, join me here. Your voice counts, and your story does too. Type it below and keep watching for what comes next. Please share. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The weeks after the letter and the meeting felt like a season changing all at once. The air around me had thinned, and I could breathe again without the weight of dread pressing on my chest. I watched the case close in slow, deliberate steps. The court documents that Samuel filed came back stamped and sealed, and Jeremy's lawyer delivered the final settlement with a cashier's check for $422,000. Numbers that once lived only in my notes were now locked in the system of banks and balances. Paper, as Samuel liked to say, always keeps its word. Jeremy and Lori had no choice but to sell off their comforts. The Mercedes with its spotless leather seats disappeared from their driveway. The designer handbags Lori used to flaunt at Sunday gatherings showed up on online auctions. The furniture they had bragged about ordering from Europe was hauled out by strangers with dollies. Every item told the story of the choices they had made, and every sale chipped away at the image they had worked so hard to polish. When Samuel slid the check across his desk, I didn't reach for it right away. I sat back in the leather chair, the hum of the fluorescent lights above blending with the sound of papers being shuffled in nearby offices. My hand hovered over the envelope, and in that moment I realized the money itself didn't matter as much as what it represented. It was proof that truth had been louder than lies, that promises could not be erased by arrogance, and that age was not weakness. I finally picked it up, folded it into my coat pocket, and felt a quiet strength settle inside me. The first night after depositing the check, I sat in the living room with only one lamp on. The familiar creak of the floorboards under my chair felt different, almost as if the house was exhaling with me. This place, my place, was safe again. The walls no longer echoed with threats, only with the quiet breathing of a man who had fought to stay upright. My neighbors stopped by one after another. Harold brought a bottle of cider and raised it in a toast. Mrs. Chen pressed a warm plate of dumplings into my hands and told me I had done the right thing. Tom gave me a firm handshake that carried more weight than words. For the first time in months, I felt the embrace of a community that had been watching all along, silently taking notes and waiting for justice to arrive. Meanwhile, Jeremy and Lori's world shrank. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, a place with peeling paint on the stairs and a balcony that looked out over a parking lot instead of a manicured lawn. The neighbors they had once impressed were replaced with strangers who carried groceries up in plastic bags and never looked twice at their car, now a modest used sedan. Friends they used to entertain stopped answering their calls. Their laughter faded from social circles, replaced by whispers of how quickly wealth can slip through careless fingers. I didn't watch closely, but word travels, and every update felt like another reminder that arrogance never survives the long haul. I found myself turning inward, reflecting on what had happened. One evening, sitting at the old oak table where Mary and I used to eat our dinners, I said out loud, "Kindness without boundaries isn't kindness, it's enabling." The words hung in the air, and I repeated them, slower, as if carving them into the wood grain itself. I realized that the years of giving, $60,000 for tuition, $25,000 for a car, $280,000 for a down payment, had not been wrong. But giving without expecting responsibility had allowed my own son to confuse love with entitlement. I couldn't carry that mistake forward anymore. The phone rang late one afternoon. Jeremy's voice was softer than I remembered. He said he was sorry. He said he wanted to make things right. For a moment, I heard the boy he once was, the one who used to run up the porch steps and wave his report card in the air. But the words were late, and they weren't enough. I told him quietly, "Respect is the foundation of any relationship. Without it, there's nothing to build on." He asked if we could meet. I said no. My boundary was firm now. I hung up not with anger, but with the clarity that some doors must stay closed until there is true change on the other side. That night I slept soundly. No dreams of doors being kicked in, no restless tossing with words like confused and selfish echoing in my ears. Just rest. In the morning, I brewed coffee and sat on the porch. The sun crept across the yard, touching the maple tree that had stood watch over decades of my life. I thought of Mary and whispered, "I don't need them anymore. I have myself." It wasn't bitter. It was the truth. Days grew into weeks, and peace became my daily companion. I joined a local charity group that met every Thursday evening in the basement of a church downtown. We packed food boxes for families who had lost jobs, and we drove seniors to medical appointments when they had no one else. The laughter in that basement was different from the hollow laughter I had heard at Jeremy's parties. This laughter came from people who had little but gave much, from people who understood that dignity is worth more than a bank account. The work gave me purpose, and for the first time in a long while, I looked forward to what tomorrow might bring. Now and then, a letter or message would slip into my mailbox, unsigned but familiar. I didn't open them. I placed them in a drawer I no longer check. My life had moved beyond begging notes and hollow apologies. The line had been drawn, and I wasn't stepping back. Looking around my home now, I see not just walls and windows, but the history they hold. The floorboards I laid with my own hands, the mantel where Mary's picture still smiles, the table where lessons were learned. They all survived the storm, and so did I. The contrast between my peace and Jeremy and Lori's struggle is sharp, but it's not for gloating. It's a reminder. Choices echo. Boundaries matter. Truth does not bend forever. As the chapter of conflict closed, a new one quietly began. One Saturday, while carrying donations into the church basement, a woman handed me a flyer about a community project restoring a public park. She said they needed volunteers, people with time and patience. I slipped it into my pocket, and that night I found myself reading it under the kitchen light. Something stirred in me, not anger, not grief, but a sense of beginning. I leaned back in my chair, whispered to Mary again, and said, "Every ending writes a doorway. Maybe it's time to walk through this one." And with that, I knew Chapter 6 was waiting, not with conflict, but with a quiet discovery of life beyond betrayal. The mornings in my new life felt different, quieter, almost softer. I would wake up to the gentle sound of birds outside the window of my modest home, sunlight stretching across the hardwood floors that had been refinished just before I moved in. This house was smaller than the old one, but every corner felt safe. No one stood at the door demanding entry. No raised voices filled the halls. Instead, I brewed my coffee, carried it to the back porch, and let the silence wrap around me like a long-lost friend. Peace had become my daily companion, and I cherished it. I filled my days with purpose, something I had been missing for far too long. Once a week I joined the local food pantry, helping pack boxes for families struggling to make ends meet. On Tuesdays, I drove an elderly neighbor to her dialysis appointments. Thursday evenings were for community dinners where everyone contributed a dish and laughter echoed louder than any argument could. Slowly I built a new circle around myself, people who valued me not for what I could give them in money, but for the time and care I shared. That, I realized, was the real wealth I had been chasing all along. When I returned home at night, the house greeted me with quiet. I no longer heard the phantom echoes of Jeremy's demands or Lori's cutting words. The only voices that lingered were memories of Mary, and they no longer weighed heavily. They guided me. I would sit in my living room, look at her picture on the mantel, and whisper, "We're safe now, Mary. We're free." And each time, the weight on my chest lifted just a little more. Through those quiet reflections, I understood a truth every parent must face. Helping your children doesn't mean surrendering everything you have. Kindness without limits isn't kindness. It's giving them permission to cross boundaries they should never cross. I had given Jeremy tuition, a car, and hundreds of thousands for his house, thinking it would build his future. But by not holding him accountable, I had enabled his sense of entitlement. Parents must remember that love and responsibility are a pair. One without the other is dangerous. If there's one lesson I carry now, it's this: give, but give wisely. Protect your dignity while you do. And for the children, there's a truth just as sharp. Parents are not endless banks, not wallets that refill themselves. Respect is the currency that keeps families whole. Gratitude is the roof that keeps the rain out. Once those are gone, money can't patch what's been broken. Jeremy thought he deserved my house because of blood ties, because of the years he thought I owed him. But family doesn't work like that. You earn your place with respect, not with demands. My message to every son and daughter is simple: never mistake love for obligation. Gratitude is the inheritance that matters most. Living through betrayal also forced me to confront the nature of people in today's world. The truth is, greed is not new, it's as old as time. But in this modern age, where success is measured in cars and square footage, it has become easier for people to lose sight of loyalty. Jeremy and Lori let their hunger for more blind them to what mattered most, and yet, no matter how far greed stretched, truth and justice held firm. Paper trails, contracts, and witnesses silenced their lies. It reminded me that the world may shift, but integrity always finds its way through. News still reached me about Jeremy and Lori. They stayed in that small apartment, the one with thin walls and no view. Their friends disappeared, their reputation hollowed out. Lori took part-time shifts at a grocery store, and Jeremy picked up odd jobs. They were no longer the couple showing off at parties, but two people struggling in silence. I did not gloat, I did not call. I kept my distance. Their suffering was not my victory. My victory was in holding my ground, in choosing peace over chaos. There was a day not long ago when a letter arrived. The handwriting was familiar, shaky, but recognizable. I didn't open it. I placed it in a drawer, closed it, and walked away. Boundaries, once broken, can only be mended with true respect. A few sentences on paper would not change years of betrayal. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun dip low behind the trees, I told myself, I don't need their apology. I have my life. And the words felt like armor, light but unbreakable. One Saturday afternoon, while volunteering at the park cleanup, I stumbled upon a child's lost baseball glove tucked behind a bench. It was worn, patched with tape, and clearly loved. I turned it over in my hands, thinking of the years I had spent tossing a ball with Jeremy in our yard, back when life was simpler and bonds were not yet broken. That small, unexpected moment pulled me back to gratitude, not for what I had lost, but for what I had once had. Love, even when betrayed, had been real once, and now I had the wisdom to cherish it and let go. My life had narrowed into something simpler, but infinitely richer. I had my home, my neighbors, my community, and myself. Every sunset I watched from the porch confirmed that I had made the right choice. Each morning I woke with no dread, no anxiety about knocks on the door or raised voices in the yard. Peace had become my inheritance. Looking back now, 3 lessons stand out, lessons I want to leave behind for anyone listening. For parents, protect your generosity with boundaries. Don't give so much that your children forget the meaning of gratitude. For children, never confuse support with entitlement. Respect and thankfulness are what keep the bridge between generations strong. And for all of us, in this modern world, remember that greed may tempt, but it never lasts. Only truth, integrity, and character stand the test of time. As I sit on the porch tonight, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, I lean back and smile. My story is not one of loss anymore. It is one of the strengths. One of the boundaries was discovered late, but not too late. And I know, deep in my heart, that character is the one treasure no one can ever steal. I whisper again into the fading light, as if Mary can still hear me. We made it. We're free. And I'm finally home. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.